session agenda. Bill 58, the committee report has been reported out by the committee, and it is on the website already, and it has gone through the vetting.
Any objections? Hearing no objections. Senator Ogden, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and good morning, fellow colleagues. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move for the placement of the executive appointment of Ms. Rosalinda Tolan as a member of the board of the Antonio B. Wampat International Airport Authority. Discuss it momentarily, please.
Please, notwithstanding the governor's objections, you may discuss it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And fellow colleagues, thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to move for the placement of Bill number 4, that's 34 COR, which was vetoed by the Chief Executive, the Governor of Guam, a number of weeks back. One of the concerns that the Governor had highlighted at that time was that, and he placed a lot of emphasis on this one particular point, Mr. Speaker, that should the override be successful, should Bill number 4, that's 34 COR, be passed into law, then it would have further implications on affecting the salaries of his cabinet members and his executive appointments. Mr. Speaker, there is a piece of document that is being circulated right now that with the letterhead of the Office of the Attorney General. My office had sought clarity on this particular issue. And in this case, the question that was presented to the Attorney General was, should Bill number 4, COR, be enacted into law, would the salaries for the positions of director or deputy director remain at the level provided in Public Law number 32-208, or would the salaries for the positions of director or deputy director have to be adjusted in accordance with the provisions of subsection 6206.1 of Article 2, Chapter 6, Title 4, Guam Code Annotated? The opinion of the Attorney General, Mr. Speaker, well, first of all, the question was posed. The Attorney General provided a statement of facts. She also provided some additional discussion on the construct of laws and the effectivity of any piece of law that is passed subsequent to 32-208. And her final finding, Mr. Speaker, reads, under Public Law 32-208, the salaries of all the positions listed in Exhibit A, which include most, if not all, of the governor's appointed cabinet members, were set to the salary rates pursuant to the Competitive Wage Act of 2014. Fellow colleagues, I'm reading on the last page, the last two paragraphs. The salaries of line agency directors and deputy directors are specifically set out in law and are not subject to the salary level restrictions of subsection 6206.1a. In our opinion, therefore, the enactment into law of Bill number 4, that's 34, which alia, which is a legal terminology, which inter alia reduces the annual salary levels of the governor and lieutenant governor, would not affect directors and deputy directors' salary levels that were set out in Public Law 32-208. So, Mr. Speaker, just for clarification purposes, when the governor had vetoed, and he was consistent in his action, had vetoed Bill number 4, that's 34, COR, one of his primary concerns was the implication of the enactment of Bill number 4-34 into law and the effect it would have on the salary levels of his cabinet members. So I want to read that last sentence again. From the Office of the Attorney General, and I want to thank Attorney General Elizabeth Barrett Anderson for this opinion. It reads, in our opinion, therefore, the enactment into law of Bill number 4-34, which inter alia reduces the annual salary levels of the governor and lieutenant governor, would not affect directors and deputy directors' salary levels that were set out in Public Law 32-208. So in this case, Mr. Speaker, I ask our colleagues for your support and your consideration. I certainly hope that with the clarity that there may be other members in this body who did not initially support the passage of Bill number 4-34 COR, that they will now reconsider their position and support this legislation. And I move for its placement in the voting file. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Uggan. Any other senator wish to be heard on the motion, notwithstanding the governor's veto? Senator Uggan, Senator Adda.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I certainly appreciate the opinion that was received from the Attorney General's office. I think while it is stated in the opinion here that passage of Bill 4-34 into law would not affect directors and deputy directors' salary levels, I think that maybe the word that's missing in there is that technically it will not affect those things. But in reality, I believe that it will, because the governor has certainly made it very clear that, and it has always been the case, that the subordinates of the governor certainly should not be making more than he is. And in reality, what's going to happen is you're probably going to have this pressure that, everybody get back in line, and that's probably what's going to happen, is that you're going to have these, quote, voluntary volunteers to reduce their salary back to the level that they were, so that they will not be making more than their boss. And I just think that's going to be the reality of what's actually going to happen, despite the fact that technically passage of Bill 4-34 will not technically affect those salaries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Adda. Any other senator wish to be heard? Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I just would like to move for the question, but in direct response to the statement that was just made by the previous speaker, technically is correct. Well, what does the law provide? The law, as per the opinion of the Attorney General, is that it will not affect the salary levels of the cabinet members, the directors, and the deputy directors. Now, the discretion remains with the governor of Guam, whether in fact, should this receive the 10 votes for an override, whether he wants to address the salary members of his cabinet. My understanding that when he came out with his veto message and he so vehemently spoke about the need to recruit and to retain his directors and his deputy directors because they bring an incredible level of experience and expertise, this is where he ultimately will make that decision, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to move for certainly the previous question. Thank you.
Senator Uggan, I understand that some members had wish to be heard? Are there other senators who wish to speak on the motion? Senator Castro, was it your intention to speak on the motion, notwithstanding the governor's veto? This is the time.
Just a point of clarification, Mr. Speaker. To speak on the motion, would it be on the merits of the bill itself? Or, I mean, is that allowed, or is it just a motion to move this onto, or can we only speak just a motion to move this onto the voting file?
This is the time to express why you will not be voting for the,
Thank you.
or whatever
For or
position
against
you're
it.
going, either for or against.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a point of clarification. Thank you.
Are there any senators who wish to be heard?
Mr. Speaker,
Senator Castro, you recognized.
with respect to senatorial salaries, I just want it to be stated again for the record. I don't have a prepared speech, but I do have 2 points of concern. The rollback of the salary tied to numerous measures, where's the call for the return of the retro payment? Where's the call for the adjustment of maybe even your retirement annuity, Mr. Speaker? I mean, I really just don't see how certain senators can champion a cause with such a narrow framework. If you are pursuing justice, if you're riding this fine line...
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, with all due respect to our colleague, point of order. We are discussing the legislation and should it be placed for consideration by the body. We are not discussing any possible amendments. If the good senator would like to introduce legislation that would address some of his concerns separate and apart from Bill 4-34, COR, then he certainly has that discretion.
Thank you. You're correct, Senator Ogden.
The last I heard, Mr. Speaker, was this is a time when you're going to tell people why you're not supporting the measure, and that's why. It's missing 2 key pieces. The return of the retro, in addition to the adjustment of any retirement annuities where the law allows for it. That's it, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard? Any other senator wish to be heard? There being none, Senator Ogden, I will allow you to close it again. On the question, notwithstanding the objection of Imagalahin Guahan on his veto of Bill 4-34, roll call.
Mr. Speaker, if I understand, it's just placement in the voting file.
Oh, okay.
We will vote for
Sorry.
it subsequent to, upon the conclusion of the session, if that's the desire of the body.
Okay, sorry about that. I thought we would do it now. On the motion to place the vetoed bill 4-34, notwithstanding the objection of Imagalahin Guahan into the voting file, hearing no objection, motion carries. Mr. Majority Leader. Senator San Augustine.
Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the House rules, that I ask the body that the Ethics Committee convene and determine if there is any ethics violation by members of our body. And the reason for that is because it's all over the newspaper, and I like to be able to clear our colleagues and put to rest the issues that the people are asking out there in the public.
There is an ethics committee on January the 10th. Your speaker, myself, appointed members of that ethics committee. As I understand it, some of the members met in a procedural meeting and maybe have an announcement forthcoming. Yes, the legislature addressed this issue on January the 10th and is addressing it. It has been addressing it, is addressing it, and will address it. There is an ethics committee. It has been impaneled, and it will and is ready to receive any and all complaints.
Mr. Speaker, what I'm asking for is that Ethics Committee convene and determine, is there in fact an ethics violation out there? It's all over the newspaper, Mr. Speaker, and all I'm trying to do is put that to rest. If you choose and the body chooses not to consider that, then at least let it be known.
We're in the middle of session. They're not going to meet in the middle of session. They've met procedurally, and they will be meeting. They have to receive a complaint to be able to address things, and they will address it in due course. But it's not a motion for the body to tell them to convene. The standing rules sets forth, and unfortunately, it's not very clear in the standing rules who convenes it. And so the thing is that they have met, and they will, as I understand it, will make their announcements very soon. And I thank them for moving forward diligently. And I'll just leave it with them. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move to place the following nominations into the voting file. From the Committee on Culture and Justice, reports out the nomination of Joseph D. Certeza to serve as a member of the Council on the Arts and Humanities Agency, CAHA, with the recommendation to confirm. From the Committee on Culture and Justice, hereby reports out the nomination of Joseph D. Franquez to serve as a classroom teacher member of the KGTF/PBS Board of Trustees with a recommendation to confirm. The Committee on Housing, Utilities, Public Safety, and Homeland Security hereby reports out the nomination of Christopher M. Duenas to serve as president of the Guam Housing Corporation with a recommendation to report out only. The Committee on Housing, Utilities, Public Safety, and Homeland Security hereby reports out the nomination of Meenakshi V. Hemlani to serve as a member on the Guam Solid Waste Authority Board of Directors with a recommendation to confirm. From the Committee on Housing, Utilities, Public Safety, and Homeland Security, reports out the nomination of Cecilia G. Mantanonia to serve as a member of the Guam Housing Corporation Board of Directors with a recommendation to confirm. From the Committee on Housing, Utilities, Public Safety, and Homeland Security, reports out the nomination of George F. Pereda to serve as a member of the Guam Housing and Urban Renewal Authority Board of Directors or Board of Commissioners with a recommendation to confirm. From the Committee on Education, Finance, and Taxation, reports out the nomination of Amanda F. Bloss to serve as a general public member of the Guam Academy Charter Schools Council with a recommendation to confirm. From the Committee on Education, Finance, and Taxation, the nomination of Robert A. Crisostomo to serve as the elected member, to sit in the elected member of the Guam Education Board with the recommendation to confirm. From the Committee on Housing, Utilities, Public Safety, and Homeland Security, reports out the nomination of Pelagio S. Sardoma to serve as a member of the Guam Board of Equalization with a recommendation to confirm. From the Committee on Education, Finance, and Taxation, reports out the nomination of Krishnan Siringan to serve as a member of the Guam Public Library System Board of Directors with a recommendation to confirm. From the Committee on Health, Tourism, Military Affairs, and Senior Citizens, reports out the nomination of Ray C. Tahaji to serve as Physician Assistant Representative, Guam Board of Allied Health Examiners, with a recommendation to confirm. from the Committee on Guam, U.S. Military Buildup, Infrastructure and Transportation, hereby reports out the nomination of Nathan T. Taimanglu to serve as a member of the Guam Port Authority Board of Directors with a recommendation to confirm.
On the motion, hearing no objection, so ordered. Motion carries. I believe we're now in second reading. We are now in the second reading file. The first bill on the agenda is bill introduced, bill number 1, by Senator Luis Muñoz. Senator Muñoz, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move to accept Bill number 1-34 COR as corrected by the prime sponsor and amended by the Committee on Health, Tourism, Military Affairs, and Senior Citizens.
Hearing no objection, so ordered. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to place Bill number 1-34 COR as corrected by the prime sponsor and amended by the Committee on Health, Tourism, Military Affairs, and Senior Citizens into the third reading file, and I'd like to speak on the bill.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Bill number 1 deals with cancer screening and health insurance coverage. There's no need for me to speak at length on the ravages of cancer. We are all aware of the devastation of this disease causes to those afflicted by them and their loved ones. Over the years, this body has enacted legislation in the areas of cancer prevention and treatment. The laws, Mr. Speaker, that you have written are among some of the more notable of these. We know all well that one of the best ways to fight cancer is through early screening. The fact has long been recognized throughout the healthcare industry. It is for this reason, Mr. Speaker, that the United States Preventative Services Task Force, also known as the USPSTF, created pursuant to the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, has developed cancer screening guidelines for services that health insurance companies must cover. More specifically, as this relates to Bill number 1, health insurance companies provide coverage for certain prostate and cervical cancer screening tests without any patient cost sharing. The importance of this coverage cannot be overstated. Cervical cancer and prostate cancer are highly treatable with early detection. Now, most cervical cancers can be prevented by immunizations against HPV, the human papillomavirus. The most successful detection of prostate cancers is a physical examination of prostate enlargement. Cost has been a major reason for people not being screened for cancer. Prior to the ACA, cervical cancer screening or a pap smear exam was done on an annual basis for a little more than 50% of adult women aged 21 and older. Today, Mr. Speaker, nearly 70% of insured women get annual exams. The primary reason for this increase is that screening is now covered under the health insurance without cost to them beyond their premiums. What is at issue here, Mr. Speaker, is that since the inception of ACA, there have been many attempts to repeal it. The repeal of ACA was a central issue in the past election for the U.S. presidency and also for Congress. The results of this election did not bode well for ACA. This is the reason that among my first acts as a newly inaugurated member of this body was to introduce this bill. I believe that it is critical that the Affordable Care Act provisions related to cancer screenings survive its repeal and substantive change. The American Health Care Act bill, touted as a viable replacement for ACA, failed recently to garner the votes needed for passage by the U.S. House of Representatives. The movement to repeal ACA is far from dead, however. Its opponents have indicated that the fight will continue. Given this, it's important that we take action here on Guam to protect life-saving benefits that our health insurance subscribers now enjoy. This is what Bill number 1 would do. If ACA or its provisions related to covered cancer screening is repealed or substantially changed, those tests would remain in place as a matter of Guam law. The provisions of Bill number 1 would become effective only under these conditions. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that you and my colleagues have noted that Bill number 1 is different from the version first introduced. The original bill had screening coverage based on the best practices among the 50 states and the District of Columbia. These varied from the U.S. PSTF guidelines, which are required of ACA-compliant insurance policies and health benefit plans. Now, after we discussed this with the stakeholders, including the American Cancer Society, insurance companies, and even a few physicians, it was determined that in order for these bills to be cost neutral, that they should be based on the latest U.S. PSTF screening guidelines. As such, we worked out with the committee chairman to amend the bill. To be clear, our local health insurance companies currently cover cancer screenings at no cost to their subscribers. There would be no cost increase to health insurers if the provisions of Bill number 1 become effective. The health insurers are doing it now. We want them to continue providing this life-saving benefit. For these reasons, Mr. Speaker, I humbly ask for the body's support for this measure. Mr. Speaker, there are a couple of minor amendments, though, that we overlooked that should be made to this bill. So, and it doesn't really need to be put in writing. On page 2, line 2, we can delete the entire last sentence that begins with the words, if a physician recommends that a covered individual undergo prostate screening by. So we can eliminate that because it doesn't apply now after the corrections have been made.
Any objection to the amendment deleting starting on line 2 all the way through line 5? Any objection to the motion to delete that sentence? Okay.
Okay, so it's on page 2, line number 2. We can delete the entire last sentence that begins with the words, if a physician recommends that a covered individual undergo prostate cancer screening by rectal exam, that part.
Have you determined what the effect that would have?
Well, right now, because we're now following the guidelines of the U.S. PSTF, so if the physician recommends it, actually we still have to follow the guidelines anyway, and that's part of the amendment of the bill.
Okay. I just reread the points and authorities in the brief of the church case, and they make quite a bit of comment about legislative history of when we make these amendments on the floor and remove sentences, what the effect that might have on the legislative history, and the interpretation of the law afterwards. So I would recommend to everybody to get a copy of that and read how courts interpret what we do as a body and how we have to be very careful about how we make these amendments of putting things into bills and then taking them out, because then it might be interpreted as we didn't want to do that.
Mr. Speaker, point of information or clarification. With that advice, are you implying that perhaps before you move on this motion that we should take a look at those points that were, in other words, it seems to me that you're giving us advice as a body to take a look at the ramifications of removing sentences within legislation, and without taking a look at what you have seen, Mr. Speaker, it seems that this particular motion, then are you suggesting that we come back to it? Because if there is a concern that the removal of this particular sentence would affect the history of the legislation and going forward, then without knowing what you read, then perhaps it might be prudent for us, and it seems to be your advice, to take a look at those points made by the courts.
It probably would be. I mean, it really is statutory construction and legislative history is very important. And the way that the brief was written, I haven't seen the response to it yet, but the way that the brief was reported, I don't know what the response was and what the court's action is going to be after receiving the response. But we have to be very careful about what we put into the initial draft of a bill and what we take out of it, because its legislative history will forever be that the legislature intended to remove that section. And this is a new section having this part removed, unless we're satisfied with the explanation by Senator Munya that we're going to be complying with the U.S. guidelines anyways. So
Mr. Speaker, if I may. So if you notice that the whole line there, if a physician recommends that a covered individual undergo prostate cancer screening by taking a prostate antigen blood test, coverage may not be denied because of the coverage individual has already had a digital rectal exam. So that's just going to include that whole line right there.
I understand, Senator Munya. Section 2 here, I mean, it's a new section that you're adding. So this was a whole new section that you added. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure whether or not it was you that corrected it or the committee that corrected it to initially recommend that in lines 3 that we strike through that section. And now you're coming on the floor and making the recommendation that it go completely. I mean, that the whole thing be eliminated. I'm just saying, I'm just a little concerned that with this new section, that you're striking the whole thing. This is a small thing. It's not going to affect big cases.
If I may, Mr. Speaker, can we have 1 minute recess?
Sure. Legislature's back in session. I'm sorry for that intervention, but I just thought that at some point we'll provide members of the legislature a copy of the points and authorities and maybe have a roundtable with our legislative council about how we should be careful about the way that we do legislation. Because I thought that the way that the legal counsel in the representing the church did an excellent job in going through and trying to explain how they believe that certain things happen because of what happened in the legislative process. That recognizing that the legislature does not just act, that everything has meaning and consequence, that everything that we do when we put something into an initial draft, take it out, every amendment we make, take it out, whatever, it has a consequence. And so I just thought we'll get a copy of that, and I'll schedule a roundtable and have legislative council explain that to us after we've read it. But why don't we just go ahead and move forward with this point? Send them when you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to, if I may, put this bill aside so that we can just correct some of the language, but we do have some advice from legal counsel to just kind of word it and make a separate amendment. So I'd like to review that a little bit more. Is it possible if we can just put this bill aside and move on to the next one and come back to this?
All right, fine.
Okay.
Bill 1 will be set aside, and we'll go to Bill 2. Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unlike Bill number 1, Mr. Speaker, this bill was not amended by the committee. There's no need to move to accept it. Mr. Speaker, I move to place Bill number 2-34 COR into the third reading file, and I would like to briefly speak on the bill.
Please.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, Bill number 2-34 COR is a companion to Bill number 1. Similar to Bill number 1, the measure would preserve cancer screening coverage as a health insurance benefit without cost to the subscriber beyond their insurance premiums. The difference between the two bills is in this type of cancer, it's the types of cancer that is addressed. The reason for a separate bill is the cost factor associated with screenings. Bill number 2 deals with colorectal cancer, the screening for which is substantially more costly than for the types of cancer addressed in Bill number 1. Because of this, I was unsure at the time of the drafting of the bills whether our health insurance companies would be less receptive to continuing screening for colon cancer than for the less costly screening for cervical and prostate cancer. And if so, I was unsure if this body would be less receptive as well. The cost of colon cancer screening by colonoscopy or sigmoidoscopy cost between $1,500 and $2,500. Before the enactment of the Affordable Care Act, only 1 in 20 adults over the age of 50 got colonoscopies. That number has doubled since the ACA. As it turns out, Mr. Speaker, there are no opposition to the provisions of this bill from our health insurers. In fact, I was informed by the management of one of our largest health insurance that it now provides services related to colorectal cancer screening even beyond the requirements of the Affordable Care Act and this bill. I applaud this life-saving policy change. For the reasons for passage of this bill are the same for those for Bill number 1. The Affordable Care Act is in jeopardy. Accordingly, so are the requirements for cancer screening coverage. No-cost cancer screening must continue in the event the Affordable Care Act is repealed. Lives depend on it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. On the bill, are there any other speakers? Speaker Cruz, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the bill. I lost a maternal uncle to colon cancer, and thankfully I have an uncle that survived, a paternal uncle that survived a bout with colon cancer. As such, the men in my family have a history of colon cancer, and as a consequence, I try to be as religious in having my colonoscopies done to be able to address those issues. I had a colonoscopy a year ago, and there was a polyp. And when I was in the States most recently, I thought I should have another one. And unfortunately, under the guidelines, it's not supposed to be within 3 years, but I insisted. And were shocked to discover that there was still growth. Thankfully, it is benign, but it really is imperative that those of us with history of colon rectal cancer in our families and a history that can and should get exams as often as possible. And I know that the American Cancer Society is going to launch a campaign in the next couple of weeks to get 80% of us that are over the age of 50 to have to have colonoscopies and colon rectal examinations so that we can discover the possibility or discover the cancer at the earliest possible time so that it can be addressed. So I think that this bill is a good step forward with the American Cancer Society's guidelines, but just with a caution that if you have a history in your family, you really should insist on having it a little more often than that. And thankfully, the insurance company was willing to cover it. But this is an excellent bill, and I stand in full support of it. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. On Bill 2, are there any other speakers? Senator San Nicolas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just a question for the author. The author was referencing how Bill 2 is companion legislation to Bill 1, and I was just evaluating both very closely. And in Bill 1, it excludes a fraternal benefit society, but in Bill 2, it does not exclude a fraternal benefit society. And so I wanted to, pose the question to the author. Why did we choose not to exclude a fraternal benefit society in Bill 2? And perhaps that could also provide us with some rational basis as to why it was excluded in Bill 1.
Senator Borja Muñoz, do you yield to that question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We actually had several meetings with the healthcare providers, and we adjusted accordingly. I would like to review a little bit more on the section that my colleague was talking about, so I'd like to review that if you could just give me a moment.
We'll take a 1-minute recess.
Can we just take a 1-minute recess?
Right. Yes, we're on a one-minute recess.
Senator Winnie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the comment from one of my colleagues about the Fraternal Benefit Society and why it wasn't included, it was an oversight. And I'm realizing, of course, that there's a lot more specifics to than just carrying over. Realizing what a Fraternal Benefit Society is, it's like a nonprofit organization such as AARP that offers benefits to their members aside from employees. So in regards to that, I have no issues if someone wants to introduce an amendment to include that also in Bill number 2.
Senator Nicholas, do you wish to make the motion to add?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess just a follow-up inquiry then to the author. Seeing how it was deemed necessary to include that language in a separate piece of legislation, would it be necessary to include that language in this piece for the same reasons, or is that language actually not necessary in overall?
It probably should, so you may make the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So that being the case, then, if it is a necessary section, I would like to make a motion to amend Bill 2-34 on line 11 and just include at the beginning of line 11, except for a fraternal benefit society, comma, except for a fraternal benefit society health benefit plan, comma.
On that amendment, any objection? On that amendment, any objection? Any other senator wish to be heard on the motion? Madam Vice Speaker, do I understand you wish to be heard?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this bill. I am happy that the legislature is seeking to put in formality its support for early screening, and I commend the author of this bill to ensure that if the ACA is repealed in any way, that we will continue to give our employees and the people of Guam tools to do this early screening and to be aggressive in their own care, preventive care. I just have one question regarding this bill, and that's the fiscal impact. The note indicates that the total potential impact for colorectal screening is estimated to be $1 million. And it's confusing because the bill provides that this screening is already being done for the government employees, and this amount is estimated to account for all of government employees. And so I'm just wondering if the committee or the sponsor could answer why are we going to have a $1 million impact from the passage of this bill?
Senator Munya.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That committee report, too, was quite a surprise to us because currently the insurance companies do cover it, and they will carry over and cover it as well, too. I'm not sure where the $1 million impact, fiscal impact came from. I'm not sure if I should request for another committee report from BBMR, or I'm not sure exactly, but there is no fiscal impact. It actually should be net zero because it's currently covered now.
Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. I guess does the Committee on Appropriations or the Committee on Health have any input as to whether this 1 million is actual? I mean, do we expect that we would have to incur an additional $1 million to negotiate this as a covered to be covered under our employees' health insurance contract. All right,
Committee wish to respond? Madam Vice Speaker, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's my only concern about this bill. It's not clear what this projected impact by BBMR is really going to be on the negotiations, and I'm hoping and I'm supporting this bill in the hopes that this has a net zero fiscal impact in the negotiations for our employees. And I thank the sponsor for the bill, and thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Any other senator wish to be heard on the motion? Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also rise in support of Bill 2, and I just want to reiterate some of the support that you had mentioned previously on this bill, and also just reiterate that this bill helps to protect those not only over the age of 50, but those who are at high risk. And in the bill, it notes that high risk means a person who is of Asian, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander descent, or any other ethnicity with a higher than average risk for prostate cancer, or who has a family history of prostate cancer. And you had mentioned that. A lot of times when people think about prostate cancer and colorectal issues, they think only of men. But I have a personal experience with this. I was living in the Washington, D.C. area when I was 27 years old. I had just delivered my first baby, so it was a really exciting but also a really anxious time in my life. My first child was just a few months old, and I just started not feeling so well. So I had several discussions with my doctor, and my doctors had recommended that I have a colonoscopy. 27-year-old female, and they were recommending that I have a colonoscopy. So I did, and the procedure, leading up to the procedure is really uncomfortable. So I know there are several in this body who can attest to that. But they did find some small and large polyps. It took it might have been several days or maybe even a week or two for their findings to be biopsied. But I can tell you, during those few days or maybe week or 2 weeks, I was in agony just thinking about what could potentially happen to me, what could potentially happen to my young child and to my husband, my family. Thankfully, the results came back and everything's okay. I'm in good health. I'm happy to report that. But I think a lot of times when we think about these kinds of cancers, we really think about those in our community who are older, those in our community who are male. And I think every opportunity that we have to educate our community, educate ourselves about all of the different types of cancer, and that we're really all at risk It's very, very important. So I want to commend the author of the bill. I also want to make sure that every opportunity that we have to take a look at some of the protections that are in the Affordable Care Act, where we can localize some of those things and make sure that our families are protected and supported, we should do that. I also want to make mention that a lot of the medical research that has been done prior to the 1970s and 80s, a lot of that medical research was only done on men. So for the rest of us, for all the females in our community, we want to make sure that they're protected and that their health is a large consideration for us. So again, I want to thank the author of the bill. I want to thank the cancer advocates, our healthcare professionals, our insurance professionals that worked with the author to draft this legislation, and I just want to make sure that every opportunity that we have to ensure the health and wellness of our families, that we take that opportunity, and I encourage my colleagues to support this bill. Susan Masi.
Thank you very much. Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Rodriguez.
Hafidin, good morning, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the opportunity to rise in support of Bill 2. Aside from what has already been said from our colleagues here, Mr. Speaker, it really is very important for us to entertain and pass measures like this. I know one of the comments we commonly receive from some of our stakeholders is that, well, it's already being provided. We don't need to mandate it through law. Unfortunately, we do. With the Affordable Care Act and the threat that it's under from it being repealed, it really is important for us as local policymakers to ensure that measures like this are incorporated in our local law, so that if there's anything that changes in the federal law, that our people are still protected, and that measures like this really need to be entertained and passed, regardless of the kind of mild resistance we see from our partners in the insurance industry. So again, I rise in support and ask our colleagues to please support this measure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Any other senator wish to be heard? If not, Senator, when you're asked, you're welcome to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With all the amendments and all the issues that were addressed during I move to Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to place Bill number 2-34 COR with the amendments by my colleagues and the Committee on Health to the third reading file.
On that motion to place the bill in voting file, so ordered. Madam Vice Speaker, can you take the chair?
Mr. Speaker, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move to place Bill 10-34 COR in third reading file, and I'd ask for a brief opportunity to speak.
Please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Bill number 10-34 is an act relative to prohibiting the withdrawal or transfer of cash or funds from the Guam Cancer Trust Fund for any non-prescribed purposes, and to make such act a misdemeanor. I want it very clearly understood that the University of Guam and the president of the University of Guam have been very judicious in protecting the Cancer Trust Fund, which is under them. The reason why I introduced this bill is because in the last session, this legislature approved 2 bills to protect 2 other funds. They protected the Victims' Compensation Fund, and they protected the Child Support Trust Fund, which had been raided at one point in the past. And I didn't want anyone to misconstrue the fact that we did not include the Cancer Trust Fund as being a green light that they could use that fund. And so in the overabundance of caution, I introduced this bill, and I asked my colleagues to make for their support in passage. We just heard 2 bills on cancer, and unfortunately our community has been ravaged by that disease, whether or not it's all natural or whether or not it's caused by various other unnatural causes and toxins that have been brought to Guam. Whatever it is, our community has been suffering from it. We have, previous legislature has very correctly established a fund to assist in the care provided to individuals who are suffering from this malady. And I want to make sure that no one thinks that just because it's not protected like the Child Support Fund or the Victims' Compensation Fund, that it is available for rating. And so I ask that my colleagues join me in the passage of 10-34.
On the motion to place Bill 10 in the 3rd reading, our Senator Espaldon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in full support of this measure. Ever since my first term in the legislature, I've always been very concerned about protecting special funds. But it seems to me now that there is a very conscientious effort by this body to really look at the various functions of the special funds and to really protect it from being raided. This is a good move, especially when it comes to the Guam Cancer Trust Fund. There are several other funds within GovGuam, special funds within GovGuam, that I believe also need to be protected from further raiding. One of them, again, we would have to seriously look at in the future would probably be the territorial highway funds. But anyway, that's not the point of discussion here. I rise in full support of this measure, and I hope that as the year progresses, we will take a closer look at other funds that need to be protected so that those monies that are set aside for special purposes are used exactly for the purpose that the fund was set up for. But I rise in full support, and I ask my colleagues to support this as well. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Espaldon. Senator Uggan? On the motion to place Bill 10 on the 3rd reading, are there any others wishing to speak? Senator Muña.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in full support of Bill number 10 as well, too, because as my 2 bills previous to this, this fully supports it, and I fully support the beneficiaries of the Guam Cancer Trust Fund as well, too, the American Cancer Society and Guam Cancer Care, which help our people directly. So protecting this Cancer Trust Fund will also help protect our people. So I ask our colleagues as well to support this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On the motion to place Bill 10 on the 3rd reading file, are there any other speakers? Senator Uggan, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I certainly would like to stand also in support of the good speaker's proposed legislation. I know that as the sponsor of the 2 pieces of legislation that he had highlighted in the 33rd Guam Legislature, we had to come full circle to try to ensure that the child support fund as well as the victim compensation fund was not diverted anywhere else other than its intended purposes. And just for the information of our members or in the community who are watching this, I think it's very important to not only understand that this piece of legislation would restrict the use of this fund other than what is highlighted in law, but I want to just repeat exactly what this fund does. Madam Speaker, the creation of the Guam Cancer Trust Fund. There is hereby created a Guam Cancer Trust Fund which shall be used to provide financial assistance to organizations that provide patient-directed services for the prevention of cancers, its treatment, diagnosis, and other services that may be required to access treatment, including but not limited to off-island transportation and temporary housing. That is the premise behind the establishment. Mr. Speaker, there's been a switch in the seats, so I don't want people to misunderstand, but Mr. Speaker, that is really the focus and the objective of the Guam Cancer Trust Fund that was initially created. So I stand in support of the legislation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Reagan. I believe the Vice Speaker has an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to rise in support of this bill. I think, of course, that it's important to protect these trust funds that the legislature has taken great lengths to dedicate these funds and put them to very good purpose in cancer prevention and treatment services. And I thank you for this bill to protect this fund. I've passed out 2 amendments. One is to the title to add the word authorization, and the word is not underlined in the floor amendment that I passed out, but it should be. It's the word. I added the words authorization of any before the word withdrawal in the title, and this is to clarify that because we're making it a crime, a misdemeanor for the withdrawal of these funds for a purpose that's not authorized, that we will hold the person who authorized the withdrawal accountable instead of the person who makes the withdrawal, who's normally a different person. So this is to add the words again, authorization of any to the title. That's the first amendment, Mr. Speaker.
On that amendment, any senator wish to be heard? I think you need to, some people may not have understood that in the back.
Oh.
You want to make that, restate that?
Sure. Okay, well, why don't I start with the other amendment, Mr. Speaker. On the beginning, on line 24 on page 2 of the bill, I've passed out a written floor amendment. The double underline are the words I wish to add right now. So I move to add the words authorization for the in the sentence so that it will now read, no authorization for the withdrawal of or transfer of funds shall be made. And then I'm also adding in the words Guam Cancer Trust Fund account. And for purposes other than those enumerated and the double underline again, I'm adding in the words, not in accordance with the rules and regulations governing the Guam Cancer Trust Fund. The original citation is redundant, and the rules and regulations further specify how withdrawals should be made from this fund, so I'm moving to add these words into line 24 on page 2 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, at the recommendation of Legislative
Mr.
Council.
Speaker, point of information. I believe that the line is that the move of the amendment is not line 24, but line 18.
That's correct, Mr. Speaker. I apologize. It's line 18.
Okay. Thank you very much, Senator Espaldon. Everybody's received a copy of the amendment. Senator Snargerstein, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I just have a very short comment. We're talking about the bill for cancer, and every now and then we talk about money being moved, and then you list it as guilty of a misdemeanor. That's almost like a slap in the hand. I just ask that maybe they need to increase, maybe change it to a felony and then add some monetary fines on it.
Point of order,
Okay.
Mr.
I just thought I'd bring
Speaker.
that up.
I appreciate the concerns that the good senator brings, but we're on the motion to amend. Thank you.
Correct. Thank you very much. On the motion, please.
Actually, more of a point of information. With the addition of this line, authorization of any withdrawal, just for clarification purposes, this makes and applies the offense to the person authorizing it as opposed to the individual actually withdrawing. Now, considering that this is in the title, I would proffer that potentially this might make it materially different because it changes the scope of either the individual or individuals that it was originally intended for. I think it really hones in, and considering that it might be in the title, I'd like that we review it a little bit further, but I do support both the bill and the amendment. I would just like further clarification because I think that's a big change.
May I have 1 minute, Mr. Speaker? Recess.
Recess for a few minutes.
If I may, Mr. Speaker,
Okay, Madam Vice Speaker, why don't you go ahead and continue with your amendments?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So that is my amendment on line 18. Is to specify that it is the authorization for the withdrawal that we meant in this bill. And the others are just pretty much technical amendments to specify the name of the fund and specify the name of the rules governing. But it is to make it very clear that we are going to hold guilty of a misdemeanor the person authorizing the withdrawal. And I believe this is consistent with the intent of the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. On the motion. Any objection to the motions on the one which says beginning on line 18 or 24? Any objection to the amendments that are on that page? There being none, Madam Vice Speaker, you have a separate amendment for the title?
No, Mr. Speaker. That's my only amendment. Thank you. Go ahead.
You're not going to make the second amendment with the title? Okay. Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just in reading closely the legislation, there's, I think, a flow concern with respect to how the wording is written together. If we look at page 2, starting on line 16, item 4, it says the aggregate principal sum deposited in the Cancer Trust Fund shall be invested by the University of Guam, subject to its investment policy as established by the Board of Regents. The new language we add here says no withdrawal or transfer of cash or funds shall be made from the account created pursuant to section 26603E1 for purposes other than those enumerated in 26603E2 and E2A. Now, where we have a problem, Mr. Speaker, is in 26603E1, that's where we create the Guam Cancer Trust Fund, which shall be held in an account at a Guam financial institution separate and apart from all other accounts and funds of the government of Guam. Section 4, line 16, prior to the new language added on line 18, further authorizes the University of Guam to invest that money as established by the Board of Regents. Now, if they invest it, Mr. Speaker, it might cause them to transfer the money from that account on page 1, line 10, item 1, transfer it from that Guam financial institution to an investment firm's custody. So the Guam financial institution may be, for example, Bank of Guam, but they may be using an investment service provider that holds the assets in trust and invests it, into the U.S. markets. If we don't bifurcate the amendment, we may be preventing the investment of those monies. And so I would like to advise that on page 2, line 18, we create a new section 5 with that recommended amended language. And then we add on line 21, after 26603E2A, we add 26603E4. And so by doing that, what we would effectively allow is that the money may be transferred from the account on page 1, line 10, to whatever investment we already authorize on page 2, line 16, item 4. So without your objection as the author, Mr. Speaker, I would like to first proffer that we break the new language being proffered in line 18 to 22 into a new section 5. That would be my first amendment.
No. That's fine. Do you have that in writing?
Right now, it's just basically making line 18 to 22 a new section 5, and then having legal counsel so adjust the subsequent sections to be properly renumbered.
Does everybody understand that amendment? Everybody understand the amendment? Any objection to the amendment? Does legal counsel understand it?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And then just subsequent to that, on that newly created Section 5,
Okay.
after the part that would say 26603E2A, oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
She crossed it out.
So now that that's been crossed out, instead after the section 26603E2, put a comma and add 26603E4.
Counsel, do we have that amendment?
After 26603E2, we add 26603E4.
Senator Espadon?
Just point of information, Mr. Speaker, I don't have my computer in front of me right now, so to speak on, if the mover of the amendment would just explain what 266034 is, it would definitely help those who are not aware of that particular subsection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the 26603E4 is on page 2, line 16, number 4. And that basically reads that the aggregate principal sum deposited in the Guam Cancer Trust Fund shall be invested by the University of Guam subject to its investment policy as established by the Board of Regents. Now that investment policy may require them to withdraw funds and transfer it into a different investment account that the university has established for those monies. So it would need to be one of the few exceptions that has been listed on the amendment. The only exceptions that are listed, it reads that no authorization for the withdrawal or transfer of cash or funds shall be made from the Guam Cancer Trust Fund account pursuant to 26603E1, which is back on page 1, line 10, for the purposes other than those enumerated in 26603E2, which is on page 1, line 15. And this would add 26603E4, which is for the purpose of investing the money pursuant to their investment policy. So this one amendment, adding this one 26603E4, would ensure the university is still able to invest the money as they have been originally authorized to do so.
So for the benefit of everybody, the Vice Speaker's amendment becomes a new 5.
Correct.
Okay? And 4 is what is originally in this, was originally in this in the bill. I mean, what's in the bill without the lines afterwards, the 4 underlined lines. And so the new 5 is amended to include 4.
Mr. Speaker, just point of inquiry again, and not that I have an objection to that, because as the mover of the amendment explained, that really allows the investment to be made according to law. I'm just not certain and clear of the sentence structure itself, because the way it was read, it seemed that in itself could be problematic. So if the mover could just read the entire Section 5 now with that amendment included, at least we will understand the flow of how this works.
Why don't you read the 4 as it remains without the amendment, and what 5 is going to read.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Thank
So
you.
4 will read, starting on line 16, number 4, the aggregate principal sum deposited in the Guam Cancer Trust Fund shall be invested by the University of Guam subject to its investment policy as established by the Board of Regents, period. That is the end of 4. Number 5 shall read, and this is inclusive of the most recently adopted amended language by the Vice Speaker. Number 5 reads, inclusive of the proposed amendment or exclusive?
Whatever it's supposed to read.
Inclusive of the amendment that I'm proffering. Number 5 should read, no authorization for the withdrawal or transfer of cash or funds shall be made from the Guam Cancer Trust Fund account created pursuant to Section 26603E1 for the purposes other than those enumerated in 26603E2. The amendment is 26603E4, and not in accordance with the rules and regulations governing the Guam Cancer Trust Fund, period. Any person in violation of this section shall be guilty of a misdemeanor.
Just a question then, Mr. Speaker. Was there the word "and" between Section 26603E2, or is that just a comma?
Yield to legal counsel, could be a comma.
Probably an and.
As advised by legal counsel, it's a comma.
Grammatically, it would probably read easier with a comma. 26603E4, 2, comma, 26603E4, and not in accordance with the rules and regulations governing the Cancer Trust Fund. Okay?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On the amendment.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard on the main motion? Oh, wait, we haven't finished with, on the St. Nicholas amendments, anybody wish to be heard? Anybody else, Senator, wish to be heard on the main motion? Is there still a issue of there being a question raised about this being substantial? Materially different from the bill originally heard. The chair will rule that this bill will be sent back to be reheard with that new provision of withdrawal rather than just authorization.
Mr. Speaker, I move to overrule that ruling, I guess. I don't believe it's materially different. I think it's a better bill, very consistent with the original intent of the bill. To protect the fund, it does that. It keeps it consistent with all existing laws. It doesn't add any new requirements.
I understand that, Madam Vice Speaker, but it was my bill, and it was your amendment, and I really don't want everybody to think that just because it was my bill and your amendment, I'm going to protect it. I think it's best that we show that with a new standing rule that we will send this back. I will send it back. Let's break for lunch. Be back at 2 o'clock.